Hey everyone, my name's Terry. I'm 18, and today I want to share something that's been on my mind for a while. It's about my stepmother Brenda and things between us. Well, they got complicated in ways I never expected. Brenda, she's this beautiful, tall, well-fitted woman in her 40s. To give you an idea, she's about 7 years younger than my dad. And man, she's something else. You know those people who are just naturally kind, like everything about them is warm? That's Brenda. I guess it was those teenage hormones kicking in, because I didn't just like her as a friend or my dad's partner. I liked her in other ways too. I tried to push those thoughts out of my head, obviously. It felt wrong. But still, there was something about her that I couldn't ignore. She had this presence that was impossible to shake. I admired her secretly from a distance. Sometimes I wondered if there was something deeper going on between us, but I always dismissed it. I mean, she and my dad seemed great together, and I wasn't about to mess that up. But damn, I couldn't help thinking about her. And I kept wondering what would happen if those feelings ever saw the light of day. If you can imagine, she had insanely good shapes. God, she was perfect. One day, I came home early from college. It was a random Tuesday, and I had a cancelled class, so I figured I'd get a jump on my afternoon routine. Dad was at work, and I thought Brenda had gone out too. But as I walked in, I heard the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. She was home, probably finishing up a shower. I didn't think much of it. I dropped my bag in the hallway, headed to the kitchen, and made my usual protein shake. The whole time, I could hear the water, distant but constant. After I cleaned up, I started walking toward my room. My path took me past the bathroom door, and as I passed, it swung open. Brenda stepped out, wrapped in a towel, one around her body and another around her head. For a second, she didn't see me. She was adjusting the towel on her head, probably lost in thought. I froze for a second, not because I was trying to be weird, but just because seeing her like that threw me off. She looked different, more relaxed, more real. Then it happened. The towel around her body caught on something, maybe the doorknob or the hook for the hairdryer, and it slipped. It all happened so fast. 1 second, she was adjusting the towel. The next, it was at her feet. I stood there stunned. I know I should have looked away, but I couldn't. Everything about her, the way she stood there, the way she looked, it was like my brain short-circuited. Brenda, who I'd admired from afar, was right there in front of me, completely vulnerable. I know it sounds cliché, but it felt like time slowed down. My mouth went dry, and my heart was pounding. I could see everything. Like really everything. She was just as shocked. Quickly, she tried to cover herself, fumbling to grab the towel. I snapped out of it and bent down to pick it up, trying to act like I hadn't seen anything. Sorry, I said, not even sure if she heard me. I held out the towel, but my eyes betrayed me. I couldn't help but look just for a second longer. And here's where the most interesting part starts. Before I even realized what I was doing, I stepped forward, still holding the towel. I don't know if it was instinct or just me being an idiot, but I wrapped it around her from behind. Like fully reached around her shoulders and wrapped the towel around her. She jumped a little, screamed in surprise, but it wasn't an angry scream. It was more like, "What the hell?" And she turned her head to look at me over her shoulder. That's when it happened, that moment. I don't even know how to explain it without sounding dramatic, but there was this look she gave me. Like, her eyes locked on mine, and it felt like the world paused for a second. Her hair was wet, water was still dripping down her back, and I could feel her body, her bare skin, pressed against me through the towel. My hands. Dude, my hands ended up right on the towel, right on her butt. I wasn't even thinking, okay. I swear, it wasn't premeditated or anything like that. It was like my brain and body disconnected, and I was just there. Her chest pressed against mine, and for a split second I thought, am I really doing this? I leaned in, closer than I should have, and I tried to kiss her. I was fully expecting her to shove me off, maybe slap me or start yelling. I braced for impact, thinking, this is it, I've officially ruined everything. But she didn't do anything. She just stood there. I don't know if she was shocked, or if she was okay with it, but she didn't push me away. She just let it happen. But then, like a truck hitting me, I snapped out of it. My brain caught up to my body, and I realized how wrong it all was. I let go of the towel, it fell to the floor. and I stepped back so fast, it was like I'd been burned. I couldn't even look at her. I stammered some half-assed apology like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I gotta go," and then I bolted. Like a complete coward, I ran to my room, slammed the door shut, and collapsed onto the couch. I felt like the world's biggest idiot. My heart was pounding, not in a romantic way, but in a what the hell did I just do way. I grabbed my phone, opened TikTok, and started scrolling like my life depended on it. I wasn't even watching the videos, I was just swiping, trying to distract myself, but nothing was working. My mind kept replaying the moment, her face, the way her body felt against mine, the look in her eyes. And the worst part, I couldn't figure out if she was okay with it or if she was just too shocked to react. Either way, I felt like a creep. I kept thinking, how am I supposed to look her in the eyes now? Like, what do I even say? Do I apologize again? Do I pretend it never happened? Do I move out? My brain was spiraling in a million different directions, and I couldn't calm down. It was like nothing had happened. For the next few days, everything just carried on like normal. It was as if the whole thing had been erased from both of our minds. I'm not gonna lie, it felt weird, like there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air, but we didn't bring it up. Neither of us did. We'd still have dinner together, the three of us, me, her, and my father. Same old routine. There were no awkward silences or sideways glances, not at first. She was still the same woman, acting like nothing was off. I was probably a little more quiet than usual, but she was as warm and caring as ever. We'd laugh, talk about random stuff, share a joke here and there, and life just moved on. She was still kind to me, still acting like the same good woman she'd always been, not just to me, but to my father too. There were no weird vibes when he came around, no uncomfortable looks between the two of us. If anything, it was like life had returned to normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, like there was an invisible line drawn between us that neither of us was willing to acknowledge. Then, about a week later, something happened. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, nothing that screamed this is it, here comes the confrontation. We were just sitting around in the living room, like we always did after dinner. My dad was watching TV, and she was flipping through a magazine or whatever. I was on my phone zoning out, trying to pretend everything was fine, even though my mind kept circling back to the same stupid moment that I couldn't undo. I think it was around 10 at night when it happened. The room felt a little quieter than usual, almost like the air was thicker. Maybe it was just me, maybe I was overthinking it all, but I swear I felt like something was about to break, and then she stood up. It was like one of those moments where you feel time slow down. She walked past me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off of her, and then she just stopped. Right there in front of me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, and for a second, I thought I might pass out from the tension. Then she looked at me, not in the way she had before, but with this soft, steady gaze. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sad, it was just there. And that was it. That was the moment everything hit me. Without saying a word, she reached out and put her hand on my shoulder. A simple touch, nothing too intense, but it spoke volumes. And when she did that, I could feel the world shift. It was like she was telling me, without actually saying it, that it was okay. Then she left. What was that? Now I get, but man, what happened next will blow your mind. It was one of those quiet days where everything seemed to slow down. It was my weekend. That's when I heard the knock on the door. I heard her voice, just soft enough to make me realize it was her. I didn't expect her to be standing there, and I definitely didn't expect her to be dressed up like she was going somewhere. She was in a robe, with makeup that made her look like she was ready for a night out, but there was something in her expression, something that made it clear this wasn't just a casual visit. She asked if she could come in. It wasn't a surprise, she was always comfortable coming by. But there was a different energy in the room, a quiet intensity that I couldn't ignore. She stepped in, closing the door behind her softly, and we stood there for a moment, not saying anything right away. She wasn't quite nervous, but she was definitely hesitant, like she was sorting through something in her mind. I could tell that this wasn't going to be like the usual visits we'd had. She sat down beside me on the couch, and for a few moments, there was just silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with unspoken words, with everything that had happened recently still hanging in the air. I wasn't sure where things stood between us, but I knew something had shifted, and I could feel it in the way she looked at me. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice steady but with an edge of vulnerability that made me stop and listen. She said that she couldn't get what happened out of her head. It had been weighing on her, turning over in her mind, and she hadn't been able to shake it. She admitted that the feelings from that moment had stirred something in her, something she hadn't expected. There was no judgment in her words, no hint of discomfort, just a quiet honesty. She told me she couldn't hide it anymore. I was surprised, honestly. I didn't know what to say, because the last week had been a mix of avoiding the situation and pretending like everything was fine. I thought maybe it was just me who felt off about it. But hearing her say it, hearing her acknowledge what we both knew was there, made everything clearer. I reached out first, letting my hand fall slowly down her leg. It wasn't just a casual gesture, though. I could feel her skin, the warmth of it, the softness, and as I traced my fingers down, I could feel her shift slightly, a small but telling change in her posture. It wasn't a huge motion, but it was enough for me to notice. It was like we were communicating without words, a slow dance of touches, gestures, and glances. She didn't have to say anything. I could tell she was feeling it too. Her eyes were locked on mine, and there was this intensity there, something deeper than just desire. It was a mix of trust and anticipation, and it made my heart beat a little faster. As my hand moved, she reached up and cupped my face, her thumb gently brushing against my jaw. It wasn't rushed, just a soft, lingering touch that made me want to hold onto that moment forever. Her fingers moved through my hair, the way she did when she wanted to calm me, like she was grounding me in the moment, making sure I wasn't going anywhere. It felt like time was slowing down, like the world outside didn't exist. All that mattered was right here with her. Then, without breaking the connection, she leaned in, our lips meeting softly at first, but then it deepened, both of us losing ourselves in the kiss. There was a hunger in it, but also a gentleness, a softness. We were savoring each second, each touch, and as our bodies pressed closer together, I could feel the electricity between us intensify. Before I knew it, she pushed me back onto the bed. It wasn't forceful or aggressive, just a natural progression of what we both wanted. She climbed on top of me, her movements deliberate but filled with a quiet confidence. Her eyes were still locked onto mine, and I couldn't help but trace the outline of her figure with my eyes, taking in every detail, every curve, the way she held herself. I reached for her, my hands finding her hips, pulling her a little closer. But I didn't stop there. I let my hands wander, exploring the way her body fit against mine, feeling the warmth of her skin, the softness, the tension in her muscles. She didn't resist. Instead, she seemed to welcome it, her breath quickening as she leaned into my touch. There was this rhythm between us, an unspoken understanding that made everything feel natural, as if we were both in sync, moving as one. Her hands were just as eager, finding their way to my chest. She traced the contours of my body, her fingers moving with purpose, exploring, learning, before they traveled lower. I could feel her movements, the way she was taking her time, but also how her touch became more urgent as her hands continued their journey. She seemed to be in control, but I wasn't complaining. There was a strength in her that was impossible to ignore, and as her hands dipped lower, I could feel my body responding in kind. The weight of her on top of me was grounding, but it was also comforting. It was a reminder that we were both here, present in this moment, and nothing else mattered. She was confident in her touch, in her movements, and it was clear that she knew exactly what she wanted. And that made me want to give it to her, to respond in the same way, matching her rhythm, matching her energy. When she unbuttoned her robe, I was almost stunned by what I saw. She was wearing a pair of black lingerie that fit her perfectly, the kind that left just enough to the imagination. My mind was racing, but I was completely captivated by how she looked. She slowly took off her robe, and before I knew it, she was back, pressing soft, gentle kisses against my neck. My hands instinctively moved to her back, tracing the curves, and then slowly down to her hips. The way she responded to my touch, the warmth of her skin, it was all so natural, like we'd been here before, even though every moment felt new. As she continued to explore, there was a subtle change in the way she moved. She shifted slightly, the weight of her body pressing down on me, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, a reminder of the closeness we shared. I could feel the slight tremor in her movements, the way she adjusted herself, her body fidgeting just enough for me to notice. It was like she was trying to align herself with me, to find a rhythm that worked for both of us. And then I felt her hand. Well, I think you got the idea where. She was slow, gentle, and I was on edge. As we continued, she reached into her robe pocket with a calmness that made me pause for a moment. When she pulled out a pair of condoms, I understood instantly. She held my gaze for a moment, her fingers already working to prepare everything we needed. I could feel my heart beat a little faster, not just from the desire between us, but from the feeling of connection, of trust. There was something incredibly intimate about this, about making sure we were both comfortable, making sure everything was consensual. It made everything feel even more meaningful. When everything was ready, the world outside seemed to vanish. It was just the two of us. I could feel her every move. What happened next was an unfolding, a slow, mutual exploration where every gesture, every movement was shared and received in kind. It wasn't about rushing through anything. It was about being there with each other, in that moment, feeling the connection grow. We both moved in sync. So sad I can't describe all details right here, but man, it was something. It was like everything was happening at once, so fast yet so slow, like we were caught in a moment that felt surreal. We had just shared something that felt utterly intense, and to be honest, I still couldn't fully grasp the weight of it. We had laid there afterward, the silence thick between us, but in the best way possible. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. No, it was more like a quiet aftermath, where everything was raw, but in the most real way. The kind of feeling that settles deep within you, like you're aware that something huge just happened, something that would be impossible to forget. Then, her voice broke the silence, soft but firm, like she had already anticipated the questions or guilt I was silently wrestling with. "You don't need to feel guilty for this moment, for what we just did," she said. Her words weren't judgmental or condescending. They were reassuring. It was just a moment, and we both wanted it. It's not something to feel bad about. She paused for a second, her eyes locking onto mine. "But not a single word to your father." "Understand." I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to argue or ask questions. Part of me wanted to scream, to make sense of everything I was feeling, because this didn't feel normal. It wasn't supposed to happen. But another part of me, the part that had already crossed that line with her, just nodded. We both knew what she meant, the secrecy of it all. It felt wrong in some ways, but it also felt like a secret we were sharing together. And as much as I wanted to believe that we'd somehow make sense of it later, I couldn't deny the rush of guilt that was already starting to coil in my stomach. But her reassurance, the way she looked at me, made me feel like maybe I wasn't the only one caught up in this confusing whirlwind. We kissed again, not as an invitation, not as a way to continue, but more like a way to seal everything between us. The kiss was soft at first, a way to remind ourselves that we were here, in this moment, sharing something that was incredibly intense. And to be honest, I wasn't ready for it to end. It was like I still wanted to feel that connection, to feel her close. I was ready for another round, maybe not because I had to, but because something inside me wasn't done yet. I started to stroke her legs gently, a slow movement as if to test if she was still in this with me. The softness of her skin, the smoothness, the way she responded, made everything feel like a continuation of what we had shared. But just as my hands moved, we heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the color drain from my face as I realized who it was. The noise outside was clear. It was my dad's car. In an instant, everything shifted. Her eyes widened for a second, and I could see the panic set in, though she was quick to mask it. Without saying a word, she moved to pull herself together. She quickly adjusted her robe, covering up the way she had been moments ago, and I watched as she fixed her hair, trying to make herself presentable again, as if nothing had happened. But I could still feel the tension in the air, a heavy reminder of everything we had just done. Then she wiped the lipstick from my lips with her thumb, a small action but one that felt significant in its own way. It was like she was trying to erase any evidence of what had happened, to make sure I wasn't left with any trace of it on me. She didn't speak, but I could sense the urgency in her movements. She didn't need to say anything for me to know what she was thinking. I sat there, frozen for a moment, feeling a deep sense of shame begin to settle in. What had I just done? The question kept repeating in my mind, but I didn't have an answer. There was guilt, yes, but there was also confusion. It felt like I had crossed some line I didn't fully understand, and now I couldn't take it back. The excitement, the rush, the pleasure, it was all still there, but it was buried beneath the weight of what came after. I wasn't sure how to process it. I wasn't sure how to explain any of it. I had done something that felt so right in the moment, but now, with the reality of my dad's car outside, it hit me hard. The shame wasn't just about what happened, but about how quickly it all had shifted from a moment of connection to something that felt wrong. Her actions, the way she moved quickly to compose herself, were a stark reminder of that line we had crossed. She wasn't asking for an explanation, and neither was I. But there was this unspoken agreement between us. What had happened was just that, something that happened in the heat of the moment, and we had to live with it. What had I just done? I kept asking myself as I tried to process it. The guilt, the shame, the confusion, they were all tangled together, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. And this wasn't the end. We'd been going about things like usual, our interactions almost predictable, with a certain comfort between us. But beneath the surface, there was something I couldn't shake off. The shame, mixed with curiosity and a strong urge to repeat what had happened before. But I held back. I was unsure and, honestly, a little afraid of what it meant. What would happen if things progressed? I couldn't tell anyone. It was a few days after basketball practice when things took an unexpected turn. I was in the shower, exhausted from the game, my body aching, the cool water running over me, washing off the sweat and strain. The warm steam filled the room, and I thought I was alone. That's when she walked in. "Do you mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice casual, but I could tell there was something in it, a kind of underlying tension. I was caught off guard. I could have said no. I could have said I needed some space, but I didn't. I asked, "How much time do you need?" She gave a quick, almost playful smile and said, "Enough." The words hung in the air for a moment as I tried to figure out what was happening. But in a way, I already knew. We were alone, together in a confined space. The sound of the water rushing seemed to drown out everything else for a second. I wasn't sure how it happened exactly, but she was close. So close. And then, in a way I had never imagined, she knelt down in front of me. The intensity of the moment hit me hard. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely catch my breath. I stood there frozen, unsure of what to do next, overwhelmed by everything that was happening around me. It was like a fog, everything muffled, even the sound of my breathing, as if I wasn't quite there. And there she was. Water streamed over us, and she was kneeling in front of me doing that things that you can only imagine. It was awkward for me, but in few minutes I used two, and I got her hair. The feeling of vulnerability and rawness mixed with an odd sense of connection. I could feel the shift in our relationship, and it wasn't just physical. Something deeper, more complicated, had started to form between us, but I didn't know how to navigate it. The moment didn't last long. She stepped back, a playful smirk on her face. "You know," she said, her voice almost teasing, "you're much more alive than your father." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the physical act that affected me the most. It was the emotional weight behind them, the unexpected shift in how she saw me, how I had been seen before. "I think I'm a little addict on you," she added with a laugh, as if it were nothing more than a joke. But I could hear the sincerity in it, a touch of something deeper, something more vulnerable than she intended to show. It was one of those quiet nights where everything felt calm, but my mind was still buzzing. I had fallen asleep, but the sound of laughter in the other room caught my attention. I could hear my dad talking with Brenda, their voices carrying through the walls. They were in the other room, joking, their laughter mixing with the occasional sound of a chair shifting or a drink being set down. I didn't know exactly how much time had passed, but I drifted off eventually, the muffled sounds lulling me into sleep. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something, a presence behind me. I thought I was still dreaming, that it was just a fragment of a fading thought. But as the warmth enveloped me, I realized it wasn't just a dream. It was Brenda. Her voice was low, almost a whisper against the back of my neck. "George is asleep," she said softly, "and he doesn't want to be with me tonight." I froze. The room felt like it had suddenly gone colder, even though I was under the covers. I was torn between shock and confusion, unsure of what to do or say. My dad was just in the next room, and the idea of what was happening now, the proximity to him, made it feel all the more wrong. I could hear his breathing in the distance, the soft sound of his snoring, making me aware of how close everything was, how real it felt. Brenda was still behind me, her presence so clear, but the situation felt surreal. She moved closer, her touch gentle yet firm. My body tensed, my mind racing, but her words came again, soft, urging me to stay still. "I'm just trying to help you relax," she whispered, her voice almost soothing. "Don't worry." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me, of how to reconcile the situation with what I knew was right and wrong. But in that moment, I found it difficult to push away. The room felt tight, and I felt a mix of confusion and vulnerability that I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't long before I realized the weight of the situation, like, we did this already, but not when my dad was sleeping few meters away and could hear his snoring. She was on top of me again, and the bed was creaking beneath us with every little shift. I could barely breathe, trying to hold myself together as she moved, smooth and calculated, like a cat. It was effortless for her, like she knew exactly how to move, where to touch, how to drive me wild without making a sound. God, she was so good. She moved with such grace, like a cat stalking its prey, effortlessly shifting her hips in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Every movement felt calculated, but there was something primal about it too. It was as if she knew exactly what she was doing, knew how to make me lose myself in her without saying a word. She didn't rush, but she didn't need to. Each motion, each supple shift of her weight was perfectly timed, as if our bodies were in sync in a way that didn't need any instructions. Her hands rested on my chest for balance, fingers lightly grazing my skin, but even that felt deliberate, sending waves of heat through my body. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the way her muscles shifted as she moved, and damn, the way she kept her gaze steady on mine. It was like she was drawing me into her, deeper with every second. I couldn't help but marvel at how good she was at this, how easy it seemed for her to make my whole world focus on her, on every little movement she made. God, it felt like every inch of me was alive in a way I couldn't explain, and all I could do was let her take control, let her show me just how well she knew this dance. When it was all over, she just lay there for a moment, catching her breath. She smiled at me, that soft, satisfied kind of smile that made it clear she wasn't bothered by anything. Then she just got up and walked out, heading straight for my father's room without a word. I remember watching her leave, still trying to process what had just happened, but nothing made sense. I felt frozen. It was like time stopped for a moment as I stared at the spot where she had been. It wasn't just the physical side of things, it was everything that had led to that moment, all the confusion and the guilt that was starting to sink in. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt relieved, even though the weight of it all was starting to crush me. I lay there for what felt like hours, trying to fall asleep, but my mind wouldn't let me. I was still in shock, caught between what I had done and the person I had become in the process. How could I go back to normal after this? How could I ever face my father the same way again? The feeling of guilt was eating at me. It wasn't just that something had happened, it was that he didn't know. How could I possibly explain this to him? The one person who had always trusted me, always had my back. I felt like I had betrayed not only myself but him too. And Brenda? She didn't seem to care at all. She was just moving on like it was no big deal. I couldn't wrap my head around it. So I did what felt like the only option at the time. I packed up my things and left. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just grabbed my bag, threw on my jacket, and went out the door without even looking back. I moved to the dorm. The idea of being anywhere near my father felt impossible. I couldn't face him like that. The shame, the confusion, the questions, everything was too much. I needed space to breathe, to figure it out, even though I knew deep down that I wouldn't ever be able to make sense of it all. I wasn't even sure what I was running from, but I knew I had to get away. The first night in the dorm was strange, quiet, but in an unsettling way. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to find something that would make sense of it, something that could help me justify what had happened. But the more I thought about it, the more tangled everything became. Brenda had sent me a message asking where I had gone, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What was there to say? She was fine, moving on, and I was left here, wondering if I would ever be able to fix things or even feel right again. I told her it was probably better this way. It felt like the truth, but at the same time it wasn't. There was so much left unsaid, so many things I should have explained, but I knew I couldn't. Not to her, not to anyone. It wasn't just about Brenda anymore either. It was about my father. I loved him, and I couldn't bring myself to hurt him. He had always been there for me, supporting me in everything I did, and now? Now, I had this secret that I could never share with him. I didn't know what he would think if he knew. Would he understand? Would he even look at me the same way again? I couldn't risk it. I couldn't shatter that image of him in my mind, the one where he's the strong, loving father who would never imagine that his son was capable of something like this. The guilt of it all kept me up for nights, and even though I felt like I was doing the right thing by staying away, I also knew that running from it wouldn't make it go away. I still haven't told anyone the full truth. Maybe I never will. The idea of carrying this secret for the rest of my life feels like a weight I'll never be able to lift, but it's one I have to carry. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I wonder if things would have been different if I had handled things differently, if I had spoken up or made different choices. But the truth is, I don't think there was ever a way out of it. Sometimes, life just puts you in situations you can't escape, no matter how hard you try. I'll probably never share this with anyone, only here really. This will just remain my secret, locked up inside me. There's a kind of peace in that, knowing it's hidden away, even though it never truly goes away. Maybe it'll get easier over time, or maybe I'll just learn to live with it. I don't know. I'm just doing the best I can, one day at a time.